The crack of a gunshot echoed across the plains of Wyoming Territory. 1876. As Archer Ingram watched the blood blossom across his chest and wondered if this was how he would die alone and forgotten in the unforgiving wilderness. His children orphaned with no one to care for them. The faces of his two young ones, Emily, 7, and Thomas, 5, flashed before his eyes as he collapsed to his knees, their vacant stares following him into darkness. Archer awoke with a gasp, the nightmare still clinging to his consciousness like morning dew. 3 years since Sarah's passing during childbirth, taking their third child with her, and still the fear haunted him. Wiping sweat from his brow, he glanced out the window of their modest homestead just outside Riverside. The first light of dawn painted the eastern sky with promises it rarely kept. "Pa!" Emily stood in the doorway, her nightgown hanging loose on her thin frame. "Thomas is crying again." Archer nodded, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "I'm coming, sweetheart." His joints protested as he stood. The old wound in his shoulder, a souvenir from his days riding with the law, aching with the changing weather. In the small room his children shared, Thomas sat huddled in the corner of his bed, knees pulled tight to his chest. Archer sat beside him, the wooden frame creaking under his weight. "The same dream?" he asked gently. Thomas nodded, eyes downcast. "I can't remember what she looked like, Pa." His voice was barely a whisper. Archer pulled his son close, feeling the boy's shoulders shake with silent sobs. "Your mama had eyes like the summer sky and hair like spun gold," he said, the words rehearsed from countless tellings. "And she loved you both more than all the stars in heaven." But the words fell flat, as they always did. How could he describe the way Sarah's nose crinkled when she laughed? The precise shade of blue in her eyes, details that were fading even from his own memory. "Get dressed now," Archer said, ruffling Thomas's sandy hair. "We've got chores before town." As he prepared a meager breakfast of cornmeal mush and the last of their bacon, Archer tallied his accounts in his head. The cattle ranch was struggling. Drought had made the grazing poor, and prices were down. They needed supplies from town, but his purse was growing dangerously light. "Eat up," he told his children as they sat at the worn table. They did so mechanically, without complaint but without enjoyment. It struck him how little they spoke these days, how seldom they smiled. Their eyes reminded him of the vacant stare of a doll Sarah had once brought home, glass orbs that reflected light, but held no warmth of their own. The ride into Riverside took just over an hour. Emily and Thomas sat quietly in the wagon bed, watching the landscape roll by without comment. Once, Archer thought, they would have counted jackrabbits or made up stories about the shapes in the clouds. Now they merely existed, going through the motions of childhood without its joy. Riverside was bustling with the usual Saturday commerce. Archer secured the wagon near Holloway's general store and helped his children down. "I need to speak with Mr. Holloway about our account," he told them. "Stay close." Inside, the familiar scents of coffee, leather, and tobacco greeted them. Mr. Holloway, a portly man with spectacles perched on his bulbous nose, looked up from his ledger. "Archer, good to see you, my friend." His eyes flicked to the children, and Archer didn't miss the flash of pity that crossed the shopkeeper's face. "William," Archer nodded, "need some supplies." "Flour, coffee, beans, the usual." Of course, of course." Holloway began gathering items. "How are things out at your place?" "Managing," Archer replied tersely. "Been dry, but we're holding on." Holloway hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Listen, Arch, about your account. I can extend credit a bit longer, but I'll settle up next month," Archer cut in. "The Army's buying cattle for the fort. Should get a fair price." Of course," Holloway repeated, though his expression suggested doubt. While Archer negotiated with Holloway, Emily and Thomas wandered to the candy jars near the counter, staring at the colorful sweets with longing but saying nothing. Once, they would have begged for peppermint sticks or horehound drops. Now they knew better than to ask. The bell above the door jingled, and a woman entered the store. She was tall and slender, wearing a practical dress of deep blue calico. Her chestnut hair was swept up beneath a modest hat, and her face, though not conventionally beautiful, was striking high cheekbones, a determined chin, and eyes the color of warm honey. "Mr. Holloway," she called, her voice melodious with a hint of Eastern refinement. "Have my books arrived yet?" Holloway's face brightened. "Ah, Miss Vivian, yes, indeed they have. Been holding them special." He hurried to the back room. The woman noticed the children then, offering them a smile that transformed her entire countenance. "Hello there," she said, crouching down to their level. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Miss Amelia Vivian." Emily and Thomas stared at her, mute as stones. "This is Emily and Thomas," Archer said, stepping forward. "I'm Archer Ingram. We have a ranch about an hour outside town." "It's a pleasure to meet you all," Amelia replied, standing and extending her hand. Archer took it, noting the calluses that belied her refined speech. "I've recently arrived to take up the teaching position at the schoolhouse." "Teaching position?" Archer raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know Riverside had enough children for a school." "We do now," Holloway said, returning with a parcel of books. Between the mining families settling in and the homesteaders, county decided it was time. "Miss Vivian comes highly recommended from back east." "Philadelphia," Amelia clarified. "Though I spent some time teaching in Colorado before coming here." She glanced down at Emily and Thomas again. "Will your children be attending?" Archer hesitated. The ranch needed every hand, even small ones, and schooling hadn't done him much good in life. But Sarah had always wanted the children educated. "Perhaps," he said noncommittally. "We live a fair distance." Amelia nodded, undeterred. "Well, we begin Monday next. All are welcome." She knelt again, addressing the children directly. "I'll be reading from the adventures of Tom Sawyer after lessons. It's quite thrilling." For a moment, just a fleeting instant, Archer thought he saw a spark of interest in Emily's eyes before it faded back into that familiar emptiness. "We'd best be going," Archer said. "Come along, children." As they loaded their supplies into the wagon, Archer noticed Miss Vivian speaking with Sheriff Coleman outside the jailhouse. He caught fragments of their conversation, something about a woman's society and reforms for the mining families. The schoolteacher was evidently bringing more than just education to Riverside. "She seems nice," Emily said suddenly as they climbed into the wagon. Archer glanced at his daughter, startled by the unprompted comment. "Miss Vivian?" "Yes, I suppose she does." "Will we go to school, Pa?" Thomas asked, his small voice hopeful. Archer flicked the reins and the horses began moving. "We'll see," he said, though in truth, he wasn't sure how he could spare them from their chores or afford the books they would need. The next morning, Sunday, Archer decided against taking the children to church. The ride to town was long, and Reverend Hopkins had a tendency toward fire and brimstone sermons that left Thomas with nightmares. Instead, he read passages from Sarah's Bible on the porch while the children sat listening, their faces solemn. As he closed the worn leather book, Emily asked, "Pa, did Mama like school?" Archer was surprised by the question. "She did. Your Mama was smart as a whip. Could write the prettiest letters you ever saw." "Miss Vivian reminds me of how you talk about Mama," Emily said, looking down at her hands. "All bright." The observation caught Archer off guard. There was little physical resemblance between his late wife and the schoolteacher, but there was something in Amelia Vivian's demeanor, a warmth, a certainty that did indeed recall Sarah. "Does she now?" he said carefully. "Can we go to school, Pa, please?" Thomas joined in, the first real enthusiasm he'd shown in months. Archer looked at his children, really looked at them, and saw the faint glimmer of hope in their eyes, a precious thing he hadn't realized was missing until now. "I'll think on it," he promised. That evening, after the children were asleep, Archer sat at the kitchen table, Sarah's old ledger open before him. He'd never been good with figures that had been her domain. The rows of numbers blurred together, mocking his attempts to make sense of them. The ranch was in worse shape than he'd admitted to Holloway. If cattle prices didn't improve, they might not make it through winter. Perhaps it was time to consider Harrington's offer to buy the place. The thought made his stomach turn. This land had been his and Sarah's dream, the future they'd planned for their children. But what kind of future was he giving them now? Half wild, with no education, no prospects beyond struggling alongside him, until the land or the elements finally broke them all. Monday dawned clear and cool. Archer rose before first light, as was his habit, and completed the essential morning chores before waking the children. "Get dressed," he told them. "Your good clothes." Emily's eyes widened. "Are we going somewhere, Pa?" "School," he answered gruffly. "If you're to attend Miss Vivian's school, best start today." The transformation was immediate and astonishing. Both children scrambled to wash their faces and don their Sunday clothes, chattering excitedly to each other in a way Archer hadn't heard in years. Emily even took the initiative to braid her hair, though the result was lopsided. They ate breakfast quickly, and Archer packed a simple lunch for each of them in small cloth bundles. As he harnessed the horses to the wagon, doubt gnawed at him. The ranch work would pile up without their help. They couldn't afford this luxury. Yet watching his children climb eagerly into the wagon, faces alight with anticipation, Archer knew he couldn't deny them this chance. The schoolhouse sat on the eastern edge of Riverside, a simple white clapboard building with a bell tower. Several wagons and horses were already gathered outside, and the sounds of children's voices carried on the morning air. "Remember your manners," Archer instructed as he helped Emily and Thomas down. "Mind Miss Vivian and don't cause trouble." "We won't, Pa," Emily promised solemnly. He watched them walk toward the schoolhouse, their steps hesitant but determined. At the door stood Amelia Vivian, greeting each child by name. When she spotted Emily and Thomas, her smile broadened and she bent to welcome them personally. Then she looked up, catching Archer's eye across the yard. She nodded in acknowledgement, her expression conveying genuine appreciation for his decision. Something in that look, respectful, understanding, without pity, made Archer stand a little straighter. "Mr. Ingram," Sheriff Coleman called, approaching on horseback. "Didn't expect to see you in town on a Monday." "Bringing the children for schooling," Archer replied, still watching as Miss Vivian ushered Emily and Thomas inside. Coleman nodded approvingly. "Miss Vivian's a fine teacher. Got away with the little ones." He hesitated, then added, "Heard you might be interested in some work. Harrington mentioned you're handy with horses." Archer turned his attention to the lawman. "I manage. Army's looking for someone to help break some new mounts at the fort. Pays decent." "Thought of you, what with your ranch having hard times and all." Pride made Archer want to deny the difficulty, but practicality won out. "When would they need me?" "Could ride out with me Thursday, meet the quartermaster, see if it suits." Archer nodded slowly. "I'll consider it." As the sheriff rode off, the school bell rang, and the last stragglers hurried inside. Archer climbed back into his wagon, an unfamiliar feeling settling in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he was making choices rather than merely surviving. The ranch was eerily quiet without the children. Archer worked methodically through his tasks, finding himself listening for their voices, the sound of their footsteps. By mid-afternoon, anxiety began to gnaw at him. Had he done the right thing, leaving them in town with a stranger? What if they were unhappy? What if the other children were cruel? Unable to focus on his work, he hitched up the wagon earlier than necessary and headed back to town. As he approached the schoolhouse, the bell rang and children spilled out into the yard. He scanned the crowd anxiously until he spotted Emily and Thomas standing together near the steps. What he saw made him pull the horses to a sudden stop. They were smiling. Not the polite, perfunctory smiles they sometimes managed for his benefit, but genuine expressions of delight. Thomas was gesturing animatedly to another boy, while Emily clutched a book to her chest, her face alight with excitement. Amelia Vivian stood on the schoolhouse steps, watching over her charges with quiet pride. When she spotted Archer, she made her way toward his wagon. "Mr. Ingram," she greeted him, "your children are absolutely wonderful. They seem happy," Archer said, his voice rougher than he intended. "They're bright, both of them. Emily has a natural gift for reading. She's already ahead of many of the older children. And Thomas asked the most insightful questions during our geography lesson." Pride swelled in Archer's chest. "Their mother was smart as a whip. Guess they take after her." Amelia's expression softened. "They mentioned their mother is no longer with us. I'm very sorry for your loss." "Been 3 years now," Archer replied, the words coming easier than they usually did. "They were young when she passed. Sometimes I worry they're forgetting her." "Children are more resilient than we give them credit for," Amelia said, "and memory is a curious thing. They may not recall details, but they remember the love." Emily and Thomas spotted him then and came running. To Archer's astonishment, Thomas threw his arms around his father's leg, a gesture of affection he hadn't offered in months. "Pa, Miss Vivian let me write on the slate," he exclaimed. "And I got to ring the bell at lunch. Miss Vivian says I can take this book home to practice," Emily added, holding up a thin volume. "It's poetry, Pa, like Mama used to recite." Archer looked at his children's animated faces, then at the schoolteacher who had somehow unlocked something in them that he had been unable to reach. "Thank you," he said simply. Amelia smiled, that transformative smile that seemed to brighten everything around her. "It's my pleasure, truly. I hope to see them again tomorrow." "Yes, madam," Archer nodded. "They'll be here." That night, for the first time in memory, the children talked through supper, interrupting each other in their eagerness to share everything about their day. Emily read aloud from her poetry book, stumbling over the longer words but persisting with determination. Thomas recounted the geography lesson, describing the great rivers and mountains with wonder in his voice. As Archer tucked them into bed, he noticed something different in their eyes, a spark that had been missing for too long. It wasn't happiness exactly, not yet, but it was the awakening of possibility. "Pa," Emily asked as he turned to leave, "do you think Miss Vivian would like to come for supper sometime? To see our ranch?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know, sweetheart. Miss Vivian is a town lady, educated, might not care for our simple ways." "She's not like that," Emily insisted. "She told us how she grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania. She knows all about animals and growing things." "Did she now?" Archer said, intrigued despite himself. "Well, perhaps someday. Now sleep tight." The next few days established a new rhythm to their lives. Archer would complete essential morning chores before driving the children to school, then use the day to work the ranch or find odd jobs in town to supplement their income. In the afternoons, he'd collect Emily and Thomas, whose enthusiasm for learning seemed to grow with each passing day. On Thursday, Archer met with the quartermaster at Fort Laramie, as Sheriff Coleman had suggested. The Army needed someone to help break and train a string of new horses, and the pay was indeed decent. The work would be sporadic but reliable, a blessing when the ranch income was so uncertain. "You've got a good touch with horses," the quartermaster commented as Archer demonstrated his skill with a spirited bay gelding. "Where'd you learn?" "My father was a cavalryman," Archer replied, guiding the horse through a series of turns. "Taught me from the time I could walk." "Well, you're hired if you want it. 2 days a week to start, more if you can manage it." Archer accepted, relieved to have the additional income. On the ride back to Riverside with Coleman, the sheriff mentioned a cattlemen's association forming to address the drought and falling prices. "Should consider joining," Coleman advised. "Strength in numbers and all that." "Never been one for meetings and committees," Archer said. "Times are changing, Ingram. Independent ranchers like you are getting squeezed out by the big operations. Association might help level things a bit." Archer considered this as they rode into Riverside just as school was letting out. He spotted his children immediately, standing near Miss Vivian as she locked up the schoolhouse. "Go on ahead," Coleman said with a knowing smile. "I'll stable the horses." Archer dismounted, approaching the schoolhouse with a strange nervousness in his stomach. Amelia Vivian looked up at his approach, and her smile of greeting did nothing to settle the fluttering in his chest. "Mr. Ingram," she said warmly. "Perfect timing." "Miss Vivian," he nodded, removing his hat. "Hope the young'uns behaved themselves today." "Pa, Miss Vivian is coming to supper on Saturday," Thomas blurted out, bouncing on his toes. "She said yes." Archer blinked in surprise. "Is that so?" Amelia's cheeks flushed slightly. "Emily was quite persuasive. She said you make an excellent venison stew." She hesitated. "Of course, if it's inconvenient, no," Archer said quickly. "That is, it's no trouble at all. We'd be honored to have you, Miss Vivian." "Please call me Amelia," she replied. "And I'd be delighted to see your ranch. The children speak of it so fondly." As they drove home, Archer found himself uncharacteristically preoccupied with the state of their homestead. The house was clean but shabby, the furniture well-worn, the china mismatched. What would an educated woman like Amelia think of their humble circumstances? "We should pick flowers for the table," Emily suggested, seeming to read his thoughts. "And use Mama's good tablecloth." "And I'll help clean the barn," Thomas offered. Archer glanced at his children, surprised by their enthusiasm. "Miss Vivian won't be inspecting the barn, son." "But she might want to see the new calf," Thomas insisted. "She likes animals." Over the next 2 days, the entire Ingram household dedicated itself to preparation. Emily took charge of the interior, dusting every surface and arranging wildflowers in an old mason jar. Thomas, true to his word, helped sweep the barn and tidy the yard. Archer repaired the loose porch step he'd been neglecting and even trimmed his beard. Saturday morning he rose before dawn to hunt, returning with a young buck that would provide the promised venison stew. As he prepared the meat, he realized he was humming something he hadn't done since Sarah died. By mid-afternoon, the stew was simmering, filling the house with savory aromas. Sarah's good tablecloth, slightly yellowed with age but still presentable, covered the kitchen table. Emily had arranged her wildflowers artfully, and Thomas had polished the silverware until it gleamed. "Should I wear my Sunday dress, Pa?" Emily asked, her face earnest. "If you like," Archer replied, touched by her consideration. "You both look fine no matter what you wear." At precisely 4 o'clock, Archer hitched the horses to the wagon and drove into town. Amelia was waiting outside the boarding house where she rented a room, dressed in a simple but pretty gown of sage green, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical arrangement. "You look lovely, Miss Vivian," Archer said as he helped her into the wagon, then immediately felt foolish for the comment. "Thank you," she replied, seeming genuinely pleased. "And please, it's Amelia." The children, squeezed together on the bench seat, peppered Amelia with questions about her life before Riverside, her childhood in Pennsylvania, her teaching in Colorado, her journey west. Archer was content to listen, learning that she was the daughter of a country doctor, had 3 brothers serving in various parts of the country, and had come west initially to care for an ailing aunt. "After Aunt Margaret passed, I found I preferred the openness of the West to Philadelphia's constraints," she explained. "For a woman on her own, there are more opportunities here." "It's a hard life," Archer commented, thinking of the harsh winters, the droughts, the isolation. "All life has hardships," Amelia replied matter-of-factly. "At least here, one faces them honestly, under open skies." The sentiment resonated with Archer, and he found himself stealing glances at her profile as they rode, noting the determination in her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes. She was unlike any woman he'd met since Sarah, perhaps even before. The ranch came into view as they crested the final rise, modest, but well kept, with the house, barn, and corral nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills and distant mountains. Cattle grazed in the western pasture and chickens scratched in the yard. "It's beautiful," Amelia said sincerely, taking in the view. "So peaceful. Been in the family 3 generations," Archer said, surprised by the pride in his voice. "My grandfather claimed the land after the war, the one with Mexico. Built the original cabin himself. Pa added the extra rooms when he and Mama got married," Emily added. "And the porch where Mama liked to sit in the evenings." Archer helped Amelia down from the wagon, suddenly self-conscious about his calloused hands and worn clothes. But she seemed genuinely interested as the children led her on an enthusiastic tour of the property, showing her the new calf Thomas had mentioned, the chicken coop where Emily collected eggs each morning, and Sarah's small vegetable garden, now tended by Archer with limited success. "You've made a wonderful home here," Amelia said as they returned to the house. "The children are fortunate to have such a connection to the land." "It's not much," Archer demurred, "but it's ours." Inside, he busied himself with the final preparations for dinner while Emily proudly showed Amelia her mother's sewing basket and the quilt Sarah had started for Thomas before she died. "Pa finished it," Thomas explained, pointing to the uneven stitches in one corner. "He said he has bare paws instead of hands, but he did it anyway." Amelia's gaze met Archer's across the room, something warm and appreciative in her expression that made him look away first. Dinner was a livelier affair than the Ingram household had seen in years. The venison stew was a success, accompanied by cornbread and the last of the previous summer's preserves. Amelia complimented the meal genuinely, accepting a second helping with enthusiasm that delighted the children. Conversation flowed easily as Amelia shared amusing stories of her teaching experiences and listened attentively to the children's tales of ranch life. Archer found himself joining in more than usual, even recounting a story about a particularly stubborn mule that had Emily and Thomas giggling and Amelia's eyes bright with amusement. After dinner, while Emily helped clear the dishes, Thomas fetched his prized possession, a wooden horse Archer had carved for his 5th birthday. "It's beautifully made," Amelia said, admiring the detail of the carving. "You're quite talented, Mr. Ingram." "Archer," he corrected, feeling a warmth in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the coffee they were drinking. "And it's just something to pass the time in winter." "Pa makes all sorts of things," Emily said proudly. "He carved a bird for Mama once that looked so real, she said it might fly away." "I'd like to see your other work sometime," Amelia said, her interest seeming genuine. As the evening progressed, the children grew sleepy, Thomas eventually nodding off in Archer's lap while Emily fought to keep her eyes open. "I should take you back to town," Archer said reluctantly. "It's getting late." "Of course," Amelia agreed, though she seemed equally reluctant to end the evening. "I've had a wonderful time." After tucking the children into bed with promises that Miss Vivian would visit again, Archer drove Amelia back to Riverside in comfortable silence. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, the air cool but pleasant. "Thank you for today," Amelia said as they neared town. "Seeing them in their home, so comfortable and loved, it helps me understand them better as students." "They're different at school," Archer observed. "More alive somehow, that's your doing." Amelia shook her head. "Children need both roots and wings, Archer. You've given them strong roots, I'm just helping with the wings." When they reached the boarding house, Archer helped her down from the wagon, her hand small but strong in his. "Would you consider coming to our church social next weekend?" Amelia asked suddenly. "The children would enjoy it, and there's to be a potluck dinner afterward." Archer hesitated. Social gatherings had never been his strength, even before Sarah's death. Afterward, he'd avoided them entirely. "The whole town will be there," Amelia added. "It might be a good chance to meet the other ranchers, perhaps discuss that Cattlemen's Association Sheriff Coleman mentioned." Archer raised an eyebrow. "You know about that. Riverside is a small town," she replied with a smile, "and I take an interest in the community's welfare." Looking into her hopeful expression, Archer found he couldn't refuse. "We'll be there." Her smile brightened the night more effectively than the lantern hanging by the boarding house door. "Wonderful. I'll look forward to seeing you all." As he drove home alone, Archer realized the hollow ache in his chest. His constant companion these past 3 years had subsided, replaced by something warm and unfamiliar. It took him several miles to recognize it as hope. The following week brought changes to the Ingram household. Emily and Thomas returned from school each day with new knowledge and increasing confidence. Thomas had made a friend the blacksmith's son, while Emily had impressed Miss Vivian with her reading skills and been given advanced texts to study. Archer found himself drawn into their enthusiasm, listening to their school stories with genuine interest and helping with their assignments in the evenings. One night, he even pulled out Sarah's old atlas, showing them the places she had dreamed of visiting: New York, San Francisco, even Paris and London. "Miss Vivian has been to New York City," Emily informed him. "She says the buildings are taller than the church steeple, and there are so many people you can't count them all." "Is that so?" Archer replied, secretly impressed. "She's traveled a fair bit for a young woman." "She said ladies can do anything they set their minds to," Emily continued, a new determination in her voice. "Even be doctors or lawyers if they study hard enough." "That's so," Archer said again, though privately he wondered if such notions were entirely practical. Still, seeing the spark of ambition in his daughter's eyes, he hadn't the heart to discourage her. The church social arrived on a perfect autumn day, the air crisp, the sky a brilliant blue. Archer dressed in his Sunday best, and the children practically vibrated with excitement as they rode into town. The churchyard was festooned with bunting, tables laden with food, and nearly every resident of Riverside and the surrounding areas in attendance. Archer felt a momentary panic at the crowd, but Emily and Thomas pulled him forward eagerly. "There's Miss Vivian," Thomas pointed. Amelia stood with Reverend Hopkins and his wife, elegant in a dress of deep burgundy, her hair arranged in a becoming style Archer hadn't seen before. When she spotted them, she excused herself and came to greet them. "You came," she said, pleasure evident in her voice. "I'm so glad." "Wouldn't miss it," Archer replied, suddenly aware of how his best shirt was frayed at the collar and his hat had seen better days. If Amelia noticed, she gave no sign, instead complimenting Emily's carefully braided hair and Thomas's polished boots. She introduced them to several other families with school-aged children, smoothing over Archer's awkwardness with graceful conversation. "Sheriff Coleman was hoping to speak with you," she mentioned to Archer after the children had run off to play with their new friends. "Something about that cattlemen's meeting. He's over by the lemonade table." Archer nodded, then hesitated. "Would you?" "That is, might I bring you some lemonade as well?" Amelia's smile warmed him more than the autumn sun. "I'd like that very much." The conversation with Coleman and several other ranchers proved more engaging than Archer had expected. The issues they discussed: water rights, fair pricing, protection from the larger cattle operations moving into the territory affected him directly. By the end of their impromptu meeting, he'd agreed to attend the association's formal gathering the following month. Throughout the afternoon, Archer found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Amelia. She moved through the crowd with easy grace, speaking with everyone from the banker's wife to the Chinese laundry owner with the same genuine interest. When she organized games for the children, her laughter rang out, infectious and free. "She's something special, that schoolteacher," Mrs. Holloway commented, following his gaze. "Been a blessing for this town, especially for the children." "Indeed," Archer agreed, watching as Amelia helped Thomas win a three-legged race, their matching expressions of triumph making his heart turn over in his chest. As the day waned and families began packing up their empty dishes, Amelia approached Archer again. "Would you and the children like to join me for a walk by the river before you head home? The evening light is beautiful this time of year." The invitation surprised and pleased him. "We'd like that very much." They collected Emily and Thomas, then made their way to the riverbank just outside town. The children ran ahead, skipping stones across the water's surface while Archer and Amelia walked at a more sedate pace. "They seem different," Amelia observed, watching the children. "More present somehow." Archer nodded. "It's you, the school, giving them something to look forward to." He paused, then added quietly, "Given us all something, truth be told." Amelia glanced at him, her expression softening. "Emily told me about their mother. It must have been terribly difficult for all of you." "It was," Archer admitted. "Still is some days, but they're strong like their mama was." "And like their father," Amelia added gently. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Archer gathered his courage. "Miss Vivian, Amelia, I wondered if you might consider joining us for Sunday dinner again. The children would be pleased, and I—" He faltered. "And you?" she prompted, her eyes meeting his directly. "I would be as well," he finished simply. Her smile was answer enough, but she added, "I'd be delighted, Archer." Over the following weeks, Amelia became a regular visitor to the Ingram ranch. She joined them for Sunday dinners, helped Emily with her advanced reading, and even accompanied Archer to the Cattlemen's Association meeting, offering insights from her Eastern education that proved surprisingly practical. With each visit, Archer noticed small changes in his home. Curtains that had been drawn for years were opened to let in light. Books appeared on tables that had held only dust. Most significantly, the children's laughter, once so rare, became a common sound, and there were changes in him, too. He found himself shaving more carefully each morning, repairing long neglected items around the house, even expanding Sarah's garden with Amelia's guidance. In the evenings, he returned to carving, creating a set of chess pieces that Thomas eagerly learned to play with. As November arrived, Bringing the first biting winds of winter, Archer faced a decision. The school term would end for a holiday break, and Amelia had mentioned visiting her brother's family in Denver. "It's only for 2 weeks," she assured the crestfallen children. "I'll be back for the spring term." But 2 weeks seemed an eternity to Archer, who had grown accustomed to seeing Amelia several times a week. The thought of the empty days ahead left him unsettled in a way he hadn't anticipated. The night before her departure, Archer rode into town alone, a carefully wrapped package in his saddlebag. He found Amelia at the boarding house, packing her trunk for the journey. "Archer," she said, pleasure evident in her voice despite her surprise. "I wasn't expecting you." "I wanted to give you something," he said, suddenly nervous. "For your journey, and to thank you for all you've done for Emily and Thomas." He handed her the package, watching as she unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a delicately carved wooden box, its lid inlaid with a pattern of wildflowers, the same varieties Emily had gathered for the table that first evening Amelia had visited. "Archer," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's exquisite." "Open it," he urged gently. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a pendant, a simple wooden disc polished to a high sheen, with a perfect 5-pointed star carved into its surface. "It's beautiful," Amelia said, lifting it by the leather cord attached to it. "It's the North Star," Archer explained, his voice rougher than usual. "To help you find your way home. Back to Riverside, I mean." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since that first meeting in Holloway's store. "I will come back, Archer," Amelia said softly, her hand closing around the pendant. "You and the children. You've come to mean a great deal to me." "And you to us," he replied, the words inadequate for the emotions behind them. As he prepared to leave, Amelia stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Will you write to me while I'm away? I'd like to know how you all are faring." The request touched him deeply. "I'm not much for letter writing," he admitted, "but for you I'll try." Her smile was worth any amount of effort. That's all anyone can ask. The 2 weeks of Amelia's absence stretched interminably. Archer threw himself into ranch work, taking advantage of a mild spell to repair fences and prepare for the harsh Wyoming winter ahead. The children counted the days until school would resume, and each night they added Amelia to their prayers, a practice Archer silently joined. True to his word, Archer wrote to her awkward, halting letters at first, but growing more natural as the days passed. He told her of daily life on the ranch, of Emily's progress with her reading, of Thomas's growing skill at chess. And gradually, he found himself sharing deeper thoughts, his hopes for the children's future, his struggles with the ranch, his memories of Sarah, and the guilt he still carried for not being able to save her. Amelia's replies came promptly, her elegant handwriting filling pages with news of Denver, amusing stories of her brother's children, and thoughtful responses to Archer's confidences. She understood his grief without dismissing it, offered practical suggestions for the ranch without overstepping, and always inquired after Emily and Thomas with genuine concern. In her absence, Archer came to a realization that both exhilarated and terrified him. He was falling in love again. The thought brought a tangle of emotions: joy at finding such unexpected happiness, fear of potential loss, and a deep, abiding guilt. Was it a betrayal of Sarah's memory to love another? Would the children resent him for opening his heart to someone new? On the day of Amelia's return, snow began falling in the early morning hours. Archer stood at the window, watching the white flakes swirl, debating whether to risk the journey into town. The children had no such doubts. "We have to go meet Miss Vivian, Pa," Emily insisted, already pulling on her warmest stockings. "We promised." "It's just a little snow," Thomas added, his expression so earnest that Archer had to suppress a smile. "All right," he conceded. "But we'll take the sleigh instead of the wagon, and if the snow gets worse, we turn back." They reached Riverside just as the stagecoach pulled in, snow collecting on the driver's hat and the horses' manes. Archer helped the children from the sleigh, his heart hammering in his chest as the coach door opened. Amelia appeared, wrapped in a heavy travel cloak, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. She spotted them immediately, her face lighting up with genuine delight. "Emily." "Thomas," she called, carefully descending the steps before being engulfed in the children's enthusiastic embraces. "Oh, how I've missed you both." Over their heads her eyes met Archer's, and the warmth in her gaze melted something frozen inside him. As the children stepped back, Archer moved forward, suddenly unsure of the proper greeting. "Welcome home, Amelia," he said simply, tipping his hat. "Thank you, Archer," she replied, her smile intimate despite the public setting. "It's good to be back." He helped gather her luggage, loading it onto the sleigh while the children chattered about everything she had missed during her absence. As they prepared to depart, Archer noticed she was wearing the pendant he had carved, nestled against the collar of her dress. "We thought you might join us for dinner," he said, helping her onto the sleigh. "That is, if you're not too tired from your journey." "I'd love nothing more," Amelia replied, settling beside him on the seat, the children squeezed in behind them. The drive back to the ranch was magical, snow falling gently around them, the sleigh runners cutting smooth tracks through the fresh powder, the children's excited voices creating a backdrop to the jingling of the harness bells. Amelia sat close beside Archer, their shoulders touching, sharing the warmth of the heavy buffalo robe across their laps. "I miss this," she said softly, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. "Denver has its charms, but this," she gestured to the vast, white expanse stretching before them, "this feels like home now." The words settled in Archer's heart, taking root alongside the feelings he'd been nurturing in her absence. At the ranch, they quickly settled into the comfortable routine they'd established before Amelia's departure. The children helped prepare dinner while Archer built up the fire against the growing chill outside. Amelia produced small gifts from her travels: a book of poetry for Emily, a carved wooden whistle for Thomas, and for Archer, a fine new hunting knife with a staghorn handle. "My brother is a gunsmith," she explained as Archer admired the craftsmanship. He recommended it highly. After dinner, with the snow continuing to fall and the windows rattling with occasional gusts of wind, Archer made a decision. "The storm's getting worse. I don't think it's safe to drive back to town tonight." Amelia glanced out the window, concern crossing her features. "I wouldn't want to impose. You can have Pa's room," Emily suggested eagerly. "He can sleep by the fire. He does it sometimes anyway." Archer felt a flush creep up his neck. "That's right, you'd be comfortable there and I'd be fine out here." After a moment's hesitation, Amelia nodded. "Thank you. That's very kind." Once the children were tucked into bed, Archer and Amelia sat by the fire, talking quietly over cups of coffee. She told him more about her visit to Denver, and he updated her on the Cattlemen's Association progress. But beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of unspoken feelings, of possibilities neither was quite ready to voice. "I should retire," Amelia said finally, setting down her empty cup. "It's been a long day of travel." "Of course." Archer stood, suddenly awkward. "Let me show you to the room." He led her to his bedroom, a simple space with a sturdy bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a lamp. "It's not fancy, but it's warm enough." "It's perfect," Amelia assured him. She hesitated, then added, Thank you, Archer, not just for tonight, but for everything. Your letters meant more to me than I can say. Impulsively, Archer took her hand. Amelia, the words he wanted to say caught in his throat. She waited, her eyes searching his face, something hopeful in her expression. I'm glad you're back, he finished, giving her hand a gentle squeeze before releasing it. Sleep well. Outside the bedroom door, Archer leaned against the wall, berating himself for his cowardice. After a moment, he collected blankets for his makeshift bed by the fire, his thoughts a tumult of what-ifs and might-have-beens. Morning arrived with clearing skies and a fresh blanket of snow covering the landscape. Archer woke stiff from his night on the floor, but with a sense of rightness at having Amelia under his roof, even in these circumstances. He was stoking the fire when Amelia emerged from the bedroom, her hair loosely braided, wearing the same dress as the day before but somehow looking as fresh as the new snow outside. "Good morning," she greeted him, a hint of shyness in her smile. "I hope you weren't too uncomfortable." "Slept like a baby," Archer lied, stretching to hide a wince. "Coffee's nearly ready." The children appeared soon after, delighted to find Amelia still present. Breakfast became a festive affair, with Emily and Thomas competing for Amelia's attention, while Archer prepared a simple meal of flapjacks and preserves. As they ate, Archer found himself watching Amelia, the graceful movement of her hands, the way she listened intently to the children's stories, the curve of her smile when something amused her. The realization struck him again, with even greater certainty. He loved her. After breakfast, with the sun now bright in the sky, Archer announced it was time to take Amelia back to town. The children protested but were mollified by her promise to visit again soon. As Archer helped Amelia into her cloak, their fingers brushed, and he felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the static electricity of winter. "Thank you for your hospitality," Amelia said, her voice low enough that the children, busying themselves with their coats, couldn't hear. "It was special being here like this. For us as well," Archer replied, holding her gaze longer than was strictly proper. "Very special indeed." The ride to town was filled with comfortable conversation, but underneath ran that same current of unspoken feelings. When they reached the boarding house, Archer helped Amelia down from the sleigh, holding her hands a moment longer than necessary. "Amelia," he began, gathering his courage. "Would you—" he stopped, suddenly aware of curious glances from passers-by. "Yes," she prompted, her eyes hopeful. Archer cleared his throat. "Would you consider joining us for Christmas? It's still a few weeks away, but the children would love it, and I thought perhaps—" "I'd be honored," she replied, her smile bright enough to rival the sun on snow. "Truly honored." As Archer drove home, his heart lighter than it had been in years, he found himself making plans not just for Christmas, but for a future he had never dared imagine might be possible again. The weeks leading up to Christmas were busy for the Ingram household. School resumed, with Emily and Thomas more eager than ever to learn. Archer divided his time between the ranch and his work at the fort, where the Army contract had been extended through winter. The extra income allowed him to pay down some of their debts at Holloway's store and even set aside a small sum for presents. Amelia continued her regular visits to the ranch, now bringing books for Emily and teaching Thomas simple tunes on a borrowed harmonica. On several occasions, she stayed for supper, and once when a sudden squall made travel unsafe, she spent another night in Archer's room while he took the floor by the fire. Each time they met, Archer felt the connection between them deepening, yet he held back from declaring himself. The memory of Sarah still lived in the house, in the children, in his heart. Was there truly room for new love without diminishing what had come before? Week before Christmas, Archer rode into town alone to purchase gifts. For Emily, he selected a journal with a leather cover, knowing her love of words. For Thomas, a hand-carved set of toy soldiers caught his eye in the window of the mercantile. For Amelia, however, he wanted something special, something that would convey the depth of his feelings without presuming too much. After much deliberation, he found himself at the jewelry counter in Holloway's store, examining a delicate silver chain with a small pearl pendant. For Miss Vivian. Holloway asked knowingly as he wrapped the purchase. "Is it that obvious?" Archer asked, embarrassed. Holloway smiled kindly. "Only to everyone in town with eyes, Ingram. She's a fine woman." "Too fine for the likes of me," Archer muttered. "Nonsense," the shopkeeper replied firmly. "Sarah would have approved, you know. She wouldn't have wanted you alone all these years." The mention of his late wife from someone who had known her well struck Archer deeply. "You think so?" "I know so," Holloway affirmed. "Sarah had the biggest heart of anyone I knew. There'd be room in it for Amelia Vivian, same as there's room in yours." The words stayed with Archer as he rode home through the gathering twilight, the small package secure in his pocket. Perhaps it was time to move forward, not to forget Sarah. Never that. But to honor her memory by living fully again, by giving their children the complete family they deserved. Christmas Eve arrived with perfect winter weather, cold and clear, with just enough snow on the ground to make everything look like a picture from a storybook. Archer and the children had decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbon, and a small tree stood in the corner of the main room, adorned with paper stars Emily had cut and painted. When Archer collected Amelia from town, she appeared with her arms full of packages and her face alight with excitement. "Merry Christmas," she called as he helped her into the sleigh. "I may have gone a bit overboard with gifts." "The children will be thrilled," Archer replied, tucking the buffalo robe around her. "As am I," he added more softly, "to have you with us." The evening unfolded like a dream. They enjoyed a simple but festive dinner of roast chicken and all the trimmings, followed by the apple pie Amelia had brought from the boarding house kitchen. The children were allowed to open one gift, each new mittens Amelia had knitted for them, before being sent to bed with promises of more presents in the morning. Once they were asleep, Archer and Amelia arranged the remaining gifts beneath the tree, their hands occasionally brushing, sending tingles up Archer's arm. When the task was complete, they sat before the fire, mugs of hot cider warming their hands. "This is how Christmas should be," Amelia said softly, gazing at the decorated tree. "Warm and bright and full of love. It hasn't been like this since." Archer trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Since Sarah," Amelia finished gently. "It's all right to say her name, Archer. She'll always be part of this family, part of who you and the children are." Archer looked at her, marveling at her understanding. "You're an extraordinary woman, Amelia Vivian." "Hardly," she demurred, though her cheeks colored prettily in the firelight. "I simply believe that love isn't diminished by being shared. It grows." The words gave Archer the courage he'd been seeking. Setting aside his mug, he reached for the small package he'd hidden in his shirt pocket. "I have something for you," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Something I'd like you to open tonight, not tomorrow with the others." Amelia accepted the package with surprise. "Archer, you shouldn't have, please," he interrupted gently. "Open it." With careful fingers, she unwrapped the paper to reveal the silver chain with its pearl pendant. "Oh," she breathed, lifting it to catch the firelight. "It's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," Archer said, the words coming easier than he expected. "Amelia, these past months, you've brought light back into our lives, into my life." Her eyes, luminous with unshed tears, met his. "Archer, let me finish," he said, taking her hands in his. I never thought I could feel this way again after losing Sarah. Never thought I deserved to. But you've shown me that there can be new beginnings, that the heart has room for more than one love." A tear slipped down Amelia's cheek. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you," Archer declared, the words a revelation even as he spoke them. "I love your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I love how you've awakened something in my children that I couldn't reach. And I love who I am when I'm with you, someone better than I was before." "Oh, Archer," Amelia whispered, squeezing his hands, "I love you too, so very much." The admission, though hoped for, still took his breath away. "You do?" "From that very first day in the store, when I saw how you looked at your children with such fierce love and protection, I glimpsed the man you truly are. And every day since has only deepened those feelings." Archer moved closer, one hand reaching to cup her cheek. "I don't have much to offer a struggling ranch, two half-wild children, a man still learning to live again." "You have everything I've ever wanted," Amelia interrupted, her eyes shining with certainty. "A home filled with love, children with bright minds and good hearts, and you a man of integrity and kindness and remarkable strength." Unable to find words adequate to express what her declaration meant to him, Archer did the only thing that seemed right. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, reverent and questioning at first, then deepening as Amelia responded with equal fervor. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Will you marry me, Amelia?" Archer asked, the question both terrifying and inevitable. "Will you be my wife, a mother to Emily and Thomas, and let me spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of your love?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes to all of it, with all my heart." Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the promise of new beginnings hanging in the air like the scent of pine. Archer woke early, having again taken his place on the floor by the fire, allowing Amelia his bedroom. For a moment, he lay still, savoring the memory of the previous evening, Amelia's acceptance of his proposal, the sweetness of their kisses, the plans they'd begun to make for their future together. The sound of small feet padding across the wooden floor alerted him to Thomas's approach. The boy stood by Archer's makeshift bed, hair tousled from sleep, eyes bright with anticipation. "Is it time for presents, Pa?" he whispered loudly. Archer chuckled, reaching out to ruffle his son's hair. "Soon. Let's get the fire going first and wait for your sister and Miss Vivian to wake up." As if summoned by her name, Amelia appeared in the doorway of Archer's bedroom, already dressed in a simple blue gown, her hair loosely braided over one shoulder. The pearl pendant gleamed at her throat. "Merry Christmas," she said, her smile intimate and full of promise. "Merry Christmas," Archer replied, suddenly aware of how disheveled he must look after his night on the floor. Emily emerged from her room then, and all thoughts of appearance were forgotten in the flurry of excitement that followed. The children tore into their gifts with unbridled enthusiasm, Emily gasping with delight at her journal, Thomas immediately arranging his toy soldiers for battle. Amelia had brought them books, candy, and hand-knitted scarves in their favorite colors. For Archer, she had a surprise, a set of fine carving tools, far superior to the ones he currently used. "Your brother again?" he asked, testing the edge of a small chisel. "He helped me select them," Amelia confirmed. "I've seen what you can create with simple tools. Imagine what you might do with these." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched him deeply. "Thank you," he said, the words encompassing far more than the tools themselves. Archer's gift to Amelia, beyond the pearl pendant, was a carved wooden music box that played a simple tune when the handle was turned. The melody was one she had hummed while helping in the kitchen, a folk song from her Pennsylvania childhood. "How did you manage this?" she asked in wonder, turning the handle again to hear the sweet notes. "I may have had some help from the clockmaker in Cheyenne," Archer admitted with a smile, "but the carving is all mine." The children watched their exchange with interest, and Archer realized it was time to share their news. Clearing his throat, he gestured for Emily and Thomas to join him and Amelia by the fire. "We have something important to tell you both," he began, taking Amelia's hand in his. "Something I hope will make you as happy as it makes us." Emily's eyes widened as she noticed their joined hands. "Are you getting married?" she blurted, always quick to perceive. Archer nodded, relief flooding through him at the excitement in her voice. "Yes, if that's all right with you and Thomas. Miss Vivian Amelia has agreed to become my wife and your mother." "Really?" Thomas exclaimed, looking back and forth between them. "You'll be our mama now." Amelia knelt down to his level, her expression serious despite the joy in her eyes. "If you'll have me, yes. Not to replace your first mama, who will always be in your hearts, but to love you in my own way." Thomas responded by throwing his arms around her neck, nearly knocking her over with the force of his embrace. Emily's reaction was more measured. She approached slowly, her eyes searching Amelia's face. "You won't leave us?" she asked, her voice small but direct. "Like Mama did." The question pierced Archer's heart, revealing a fear he hadn't realized his daughter carried. Amelia met Emily's gaze steadily. "I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen, Emily. But I can promise that I choose you, all of you, with my whole heart, and I will do everything in my power to stay with you for a very long time." Emily considered this for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with the honest answer. She stepped forward into Amelia's embrace, joining her brother. Over the children's heads, Amelia's eyes met Archer's, and the love he saw there filled the last empty spaces in his heart. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Riverside. Most reactions were positive. Holloway beamed with satisfaction. Sheriff Coleman offered hearty congratulations, and Reverend Hopkins expressed his delight at performing the ceremony. There were a few raised eyebrows, of course. Mrs. Peterson, the postmaster's wife, couldn't resist pointing out that Amelia was giving up a promising career for the uncertainties of ranch life. And old Mr. Simmons questioned whether Archer was being fair to Sarah's memory by remarrying so hastily, though 3 years of widowhood hardly seemed hasty to Archer. Amelia weathered these comments with grace, neither defending her choices nor apologizing for them. "People will always have opinions," she told Archer when he expressed frustration at some particularly pointed remarks. "What matters is that we know our own hearts." They decided on a spring wedding when the worst of winter had passed and before the demanding summer season began. The intervening months were filled with preparation not just for the wedding, but for their life together. Amelia continued teaching, but spent weekends at the ranch, gradually moving her belongings from the boarding house and helping Archer make improvements to the homestead. Together they repainted the main room, replaced the worn curtains, and reorganized the sleeping arrangements to give the children one room and themselves the other. The children blossomed under the new family dynamic. Emily grew more confident in her studies, even helping younger students at school. Thomas became less withdrawn, joining in games with other boys his age, and taking pride in his growing responsibilities on the ranch. Most significantly, Archer watched their eyes change. The vacant stare that had haunted him for years, the doll-like emptiness that had settled in after Sarah's death, gradually gave way to something warmer, more engaged. It began with sparks of interest, flashes of excitement, but by the time the first spring flowers appeared, the transformation was complete. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, a perfect April morning with just enough breeze to rustle the new leaves on the cottonwoods. The ceremony was held in the riverside church, filled to capacity with townspeople and ranchers from miles around. Emily, resplendent in a new dress of pale blue, served as Amelia's attendant, her pride evident in every careful step down the aisle. Thomas, solemn in his best suit, carried the rings on a small cushion Amelia had embroidered for the occasion. When Archer turned to see his bride enter the church, the sight took his breath away. Amelia wore a simple gown of ivory silk, not the elaborate confection favored by Eastern brides, but elegant in its clean lines and perfect fit. Her hair was arranged in a crown of braids intertwined with spring wildflowers, and her face glowed with happiness. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. Reverend Hopkins spoke of new beginnings and God's boundless grace, of families forged through love rather than merely blood. When it came time for the vows, Archer's voice rang clear through the church, carrying the certainty that had been growing in him since that first meeting in the general store. I, Archer, take you, Amelia, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. As they turned to face the congregation, now husband and wife, Archer caught sight of Emily and Thomas standing together near the altar. Their faces were alight with joy, their eyes once so empty and lifeless now shining with a brightness that rivaled the spring sun streaming through the church windows. In that moment, he knew with unshakable certainty that Sarah would have approved. She had loved their children too much to want them to grow up in the shadow of grief. And perhaps, in some mysterious way, she had guided Amelia to them, knowing this remarkable woman could heal what had been broken. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by nearly every family in Riverside. Lanterns were strung between the trees, creating a magical glow as dusk fell and the revelry continued. Archer found a moment of quiet with his new wife as the evening deepened, drawing her away from the crowd to the old porch swing Sarah had loved so much. "Happy Mrs. Ingram?" he asked, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. "Completely," Amelia replied, leaning against his shoulder. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. Across the yard, Emily and Thomas played with the other children, their laughter ringing out in the gathering darkness. Watching them, Archer was struck anew by the transformation. They were truly children again, full of life and possibility, their eyes bright with hopes and dreams for the future. "You did that," he said softly to Amelia, nodding toward the children. "You brought them back to life." Amelia shook her head, her hand finding his. "We did it together, Archer. You laid the foundation with your steadfast love, even when it seemed they couldn't feel it. I just helped build upon what was already there." As if sensing they were being discussed, Emily and Thomas looked up, their faces breaking into matching smiles at the sight of their father and new mother. They waved enthusiastically before returning to their game. "Our family," Archer said, the words a prayer of gratitude. "Our family," Amelia echoed, her smile lighting the night more effectively than all the lanterns combined. In that perfect moment, surrounded by friends and with his children's joyful voices carrying on the spring air, Archer knew he had been given a second chance at happiness, not to replace what was lost, but to build something new and beautiful from the foundation of what remained. The cowboy who had once looked into his children's empty eyes now watched as they shone with life and love, brightened by the smile of the woman who had chosen to share their journey, a brightness that outshone even the promise of morning.